Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, June 4th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Netanyahu could sabotage the ceasefire deal. So Axios reported on Monday that Israeli officials are worried that recent comments from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu could sabotage the chances of the Gaza ceasefire proposal that was put forward by President Biden. So the Israeli officials said that there was constructive ambiguity in the proposal that could allow Israel and Hamas to enter the first phase of the deal, which involves a 6-week truce and initial hostage and prisoner exchange, without Israel committing to a permanent ceasefire. A permanent ceasefire and Israeli withdrawal from Gaza has been Hamas's main demand for a hostage deal. But since Biden outlined this potential agreement, Netanyahu and his close aides have said that Israel would not agree to a permanent ceasefire until it achieves its goals in Gaza, which includes destroying Hamas's capabilities. So under this potential deal, the two sides would negotiate the terms for a permanent ceasefire during the first phase. And a senior Israeli official told Axios that Netanyahu was killing the ambiguity by ruling out a permanent truce. A second Israeli official said, quote, "Instead of keeping things ambiguous, his statements are pushing Hamas to ask for more clarification, making it harder to get a deal," end quote. So essentially what they're saying is that the deal was vague enough that if the two sides agreed to it, it didn't mean that Israel was agreeing to a permanent ceasefire, because it says that they would negotiate the terms of that permanent ceasefire during the first phase. So then you have Netanyahu saying, no, we're not going to. There's not going to be a permanent ceasefire. That's going to make Hamas look for stronger guarantees. So they're essentially saying that Netanyahu is sabotaging the deal, and it's really not a surprise. One of the Israeli officials said that Netanyahu was trying to placate, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the two Israeli ministers who are saying they will resign from the government and bring down the coalition if it agrees to this deal. But of course, Netanyahu has his own reasons for not wanting to pause this genocidal war of his in Gaza. One big one is the fact that if there even is, I'm saying he has his own reasons not to pause the fighting, not even for a few weeks, because I believe it'll be harder for him to restart with all the international pressure. You got the ICJ, the ICC, all this stuff happening, and the fact that there might be more domestic pressure on Netanyahu if there is a pause, because the polling has shown that Israelis want him to resign once this thing is over, because of October 7th, because of his failure to prevent it. So he has that motive to keep this thing going. And then we know that his government and many ministers in his Likud party openly want, ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and they want to reestablish settlements and things like that. So, allowing a 6-week pause to let in all this, part of it would be sending in a lot more aid, and everything would kind of let the Palestinians reestablish themselves in certain areas. It's not like there's going to be any reconstruction. That would take years and years, of course. But I think even that he wouldn't, for those designs that they have on Gaza, they wouldn't want to do that. I think I'm pretty pessimistic about this whole ceasefire deal. Hopefully, it's just naive to even hope for things like this anymore, that if the U.S. really wanted to, they could really put the pressure on Israel right now to just agree to this deal, but they're not doing that. There's no red line in Rafah or anything. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu says that Biden's ceasefire proposal is incomplete. So more about this. Netanyahu had some more comments about it on Monday. He said the Gaza ceasefire proposal presented by President Biden was incomplete, and he denied that Israel agreed to pursue a ceasefire. He told a group of Israeli lawmakers, quote, The claim that we agreed to a ceasefire without our conditions being met is incorrect. The proposal that Biden presented is incomplete, end quote. Netanyahu again reaffirmed that he would not agree to a permanent ceasefire. And Biden said that this proposal he unveiled would lead to a permanent truce and Israeli withdrawal. It's kind of the whole thing that Hamas is looking for again. Biden framed this potential deal as an Israeli proposal, but Netanyahu said that there were gaps between the Israeli version and what Biden presented. So he's denying that it was an Israeli proposal. And Netanyahu said that Israel could potentially agree to a 6-week ceasefire for hostages to be released, but that he would not end military operations in Gaza permanently. So over in Washington, the White House is still claiming that the ceasefire deal was an Israeli proposal, despite Netanyahu's rejection of it. John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, he said, quote, "As for gaps, I don't know what gaps you're referring to. We're confident that accurately reflects the Israeli proposal, a proposal we worked with the Israelis on, so I know of no gaps to speak of," end quote. So that's what he said when he was asked about Netanyahu's comments, saying that there are gaps. He's saying, what are you talking about? There's no gaps. So it's just kind of so much, it's kind of two different realities that we see. And we've kind of seen this for the past few months. This narrative about that the administration is trying to push about the future plans for Gaza, when you have Netanyahu just being against all of them, like the idea of a two-state solution or something like that. And we know that Hamas, they're still, I haven't seen an official response from them besides them saying that they have taken the proposal positively. And we know that it's a very similar proposal, if not, nearly identical to the one that Hamas agreed to at the beginning of May when Israel launched its attack to capture the Rafah border crossing. All right. So the next one here, 3,500 Palestinian children are at risk of starving to death. So Gaza's government media office released a statement on Monday that said over 3,500 Palestinian children under the age of 5 are at risk of starving to death in Gaza due to the Israeli siege. The media office said the children are suffering from, quote, acute malnutrition affecting their bodies, exposing them to infectious diseases, hindering their growth, and threatening their survival, end quote. I saw some awful pictures of there's babies who've gotten like hepatitis A and they have all this swelling because of it. That's really spreading, the hepatitis. The statement said the children were at risk of, oh wait, did I just read that? No, sorry. The statement said the children were at risk of dying due to, quote, a severe shortage of milk and food, a lack of nutritional supplements, and the denial of vaccinations, end quote. The media office pointed to the fact that the Rafah border crossing has been closed since May 7th, and barely any aid has entered Gaza since then. So on Saturday, the Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that a 13-year-old boy died due to malnutrition. And that was in Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip at the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital. And Wafa added that so far 37 Palestinians have died of malnutrition and dehydration due to the Israeli restrictions on aid, although it's unclear if every starvation death has been recorded. And I know a few months back there was a few dozen who died around the same time, and it was mostly children with with health problems, with underlying problems, and the malnutrition. Of course, it hurts people like that, the most vulnerable, the hardest. They need real nutritional food, not just the stuff that they have been getting, and they're the ones usually to die first, of course. And there's a few elderly people that died of malnutrition as well. So the Gaza's health ministry put out a death toll update on Monday and said that the number, that 36,479 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli military operations since October 7th. And we know the estimate of children that have been killed is over 15,000. And the U.S. continues to arm Israel and support the slaughter and starvation of Palestinians despite U.S. laws prohibiting military aid to countries that block humanitarian assistance shipments. The State Department claimed in a report that Israel was not blocking aid, and that allowed the weapons shipments to continue to flow. And a State Department official actually just resigned over that, calling that report false, saying that, it goes against what everybody actually believes in the State Department. Because it is very clear that Israel has been blocking aid shipments. I just don't understand how they could possibly deny it. But of course, it's we know who we're talking about here. All right, so the next one here, New York hospital fires nurse for empathizing with Gaza mothers. So this article is from Brett Wilkins. A nurse was fired earlier this month from a New York City hospital for a speech lamenting the anguish felt by Palestinian mothers whose children were killed during the Gaza genocide, remarks that came as she was being honored for providing extraordinary care to mothers who've lost their babies. So this is NYU Langan health, labor, and delivery nurse Hesen Jabr, who is Palestinian American. She was terminated over her speech, which was delivered on May 7th. So she was fired from her job as a nurse for empathizing, like Brett puts it, empathizing with the Palestinians. She said in this speech accepting this award that she got, quote, "It pains me to see the women from my country going through unimaginable losses themselves during the current genocide in Gaza. Even though I can't hold their hands and comfort them as they grieve their unborn children and the children they have lost during this genocide, I hope to keep making them proud as I represent them here at NYU," end quote. So in an Instagram post, she recounted what she said happened to her when she went back to work for the first time after her speech. She said, quote, "As soon as I walked onto the unit, I was dragged into an impromptu meeting with the president and vice president of nursing at NYU, Langan, to discuss how I put others at risk and ruined the ceremony and offended people because a small part of my speech was toward the grieving mothers in my country. I was sent back to work my shift while the hospital spent the day figuring out what to do with me. After working almost the entire shift, I was dragged once again to an office where I was read my termination letter by the Director of Human Resources, Austin Bender, and escorted off the premises by a plainclothes police officer," end quote. So pretty outrageous. All right, so the next one here, Iran confirms Oman-Brokered talks with the U.S. So Iran's acting foreign minister, Ali Bakiri Kani, confirmed on Friday that Tehran has been holding Oman-Brokered talks with the U.S. amid soaring tensions in the Middle East. Axios reported last month that senior U.S. officials held indirect negotiations with Iran in Oman about how to avoid escalations in the region. The talks involved Brett McGurk, who is President Biden's top Middle East official on the National Security Council. Bagheri Kani was asked about the reports during a trip to Lebanon and said, quote, "We have always continued our negotiations and they have never stopped," end quote. So the risk of regional escalation, I've been meaning to cover that these talks have been going on. We've kind of known for a while that there's been reports of these talks between Iran and the U.S. in Oman amid all the regional escalation. So it's good to know that at least they're having some communication. And I think it's pretty clear that they have been having some, judging by the responses to certain things that we've seen. But the risk of regional escalation, of course, is still high. Israel has again ramped up its airstrikes in Syria, and I saw today the airstrikes in Aleppo that I covered yesterday. According to Iran's student news network, an Iranian military advisor was killed in the attack. And that was reported by Reuters, citing the student news network report. I didn't see it getting too much attention in other Iranian media, so it seems like they're kind of keeping it quiet, or maybe it's not completely confirmed. But there's the risk. This is something that happened pretty often before Israel bombed the Iranian consulate, that Israeli airstrikes in Syria would kill an IRGC advisor here, a few over several months. But then the attack on the consulate was just so brazen, and they killed a very high-level Quds Force commander. and they bombed the embassy. They bombed the diplomatic facility. So, of course, Iran responded. So anyway, I just mentioned in this story, how Iran choreographed its missile and drone attack on Israel. They said they gave 72-hour notice. They said they gave 72-hour notice to the U.S. The U.S. denied that, but Turkey and Jordan confirmed that Iran gave them a warning. And if Jordan knew about it, if Turkey knew about it, that means that they would be telling the U.S. So the U.S. was definitely aware of what was going to happen. So it's just a sign of how they're choreographing their moves there. And Bagheri Khani's visit to Lebanon marked his first trip as acting foreign minister since he replaced Hossein Amir Abdollahian, who died in a helicopter crash alongside Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi on May 19th. Okay, so the next one here, Israeli drone strikes kill 2 in southern Lebanon. So this one's from Jason Ditz. Israel continued its attacks against motorcycles in southern Lebanon this morning, and this was Monday morning when Jason wrote this, targeting one in Naqoura. In the attack, one person was killed and another wounded. Exactly who the casualties were was not disclosed, so we don't know if that was Hezbollah or a civilian who was killed in that one. And there was a second drone that struck a car near another southern village, killing one person. And Israel identified him as a member of Hezbollah, and I'm not sure if that was confirmed by Hezbollah that one of their members were killed. So 2 killed on Monday. Israeli attacks on southern Lebanon continue. Hezbollah said that they fired guided missiles at Israeli military vehicles in northern Israel and that they launched suicide drones against Israel's base in northern Israel. And they said it was in retaliation for one of the attacks. So the situation continues. All right, so the next one here, Biden to skip Ukraine summit despite Zelensky's plea. So President Biden will skip a summit on the Ukraine war that will be held in Switzerland despite Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urging him to attend. This summit will be held on June 15th, and it is being presented as a peace summit, but there's one big problem is that Russia has not been invited to attend. And there's been similar summits like this before that they call peace summits, and Zelensky and Ukraine, use them to push Zelensky's terms and demands for peace talks, which include a complete Russian withdrawal from Ukraine and Ukrainian control of Crimea, which are obviously just non-starters for any type of negotiations with Moscow. So instead of going to the summit, Biden will attend a fundraising event in California, and he is sending Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place. A spokesperson for Harris said that she will, quote, underscore the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to supporting Ukraine's effort to secure a just and lasting peace, end quote. The U.S. and its close allies have discouraged negotiations with Russia throughout the war, including talks that were held in March and April of 2022. It's a very important detail that many people don't realize. So back then, a real peace deal was on the table. It had a chance. And according to Ukraine's top negotiator at the time, then British Prime Minister Boris Johnson traveled to Kiev in April 2022 and told the Ukrainians to keep fighting. And the Ukrainian media reports about that said that he was speaking for the collective West. And there's plenty of other evidence that the U.S. and its close NATO allies were discouraging those peace talks. They were ready to go. They wanted to weaken Russia. They saw their opportunity. So today, the U.S. maintains that it will not pressure Zelensky to negotiate, even though his demands for peace are unrealistic and Ukrainian forces have no chance of winning on the battlefield. Over the weekend, Zelensky made a rare trip to Asia to rally support for his war effort. At the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, he accused China of working with Russia to undermine the Switzerland summit. Zelensky said, quote, today, unfortunately, regrettably, Russia is using Chinese influence on the region, using Chinese diplomats, also does everything to disrupt the peace summit. This is unfortunate that such a big, independent, powerful country as China is an instrument in the hands of Putin, end quote. So taking shots at China. And I don't remember Zelensky doing this. I could have missed it. But when China came out with its peace plan for Ukraine, Zelensky reacted positively to it, even though he wasn't really interested in it. I think it was more so he wants long-term Chinese investments in Ukraine. He wants China to help rebuild and everything. But now he's taking shots at China. And why is he doing that? Because China's not going to the Switzerland summit. China said that it would not attend because it did not believe the meeting would facilitate a peace deal since Russia was not invited. So Biden kind of snubs Zelensky on this. All right, so the next one here. Russia warns the U.S. is close to making a fatal miscalculation over Ukraine. So on Monday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov warned the U.S. to listen to warnings from Russian President Vladimir Putin about allowing Ukraine to strike Russian territory with American-made weapons. Ryabkov said, quote, "I would like to caution American officials against miscalculations, which may have fatal consequences. For some unknown reason, they underestimate the seriousness of the rebuff they may receive." He continues, "I am urging these officials, who seemingly are not bothered by anything, to take some time away from playing computer games," which is apparently what they are doing given their lighthearted approach to serious issues, and take a closer look at what Putin said, particularly at a press conference following talks in Tashkent, end quote. And that's referring to Putin's warning that he made to NATO countries when he was in Uzbekistan last week. Putin said that there would be serious consequences for any NATO country that allowed Ukraine to hit Russian territory with its weapons. And here, again, this was last week. This was before the U.S. gave Ukraine the green light to use its weapons to hit Russian territory. At this time, we saw some European countries, I believe it was Sweden and the UK, saying that they would let Ukraine do it. So Putin's warning seemed to be aimed at them, but he was kind of asking how would the U.S. respond if there were serious consequences for these other countries? So what is he hinting at there that the serious consequences are? Maybe some sort of strikes. So I'll just read the Putin quote. He said, quote, "This constant escalation can lead to serious consequences. If these serious consequences occur in Europe, how will the U.S. behave, bearing in mind our parity in the field of strategic weapons? Hard to say. Do they want a global conflict?" End quote. And Ryabkov said that Putin's comments were a very serious warning and should be treated that way. So we've seen this U.S. and other Western officials just shrugging off these warnings, saying, no, there's not going to be an escalation. That's what Stoltenberg said the other day. And I've mentioned this quite a bit, but I think it's very important for people to understand that Russia has escalated its war in Ukraine quite a bit in response to Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory. Going back to October 2022, they started the large-scale missile strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure after the bombing of the Crimean Bridge. And then just recently, Putin is saying that this offensive in Kharkiv is a response to the Ukrainian attacks in Belgorod. So we see direct results of what happens. And they also recently ramped up the energy infrastructure strikes after Ukraine started hitting oil refineries inside Russia. So what are they going to do in response to this? That is the big question. All right, so the next one here, South Korea ends military agreement with the North. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So this is an area that I have neglected, is the Korean Peninsula. Tensions are still very high on the Korean Peninsula. And Seoul, South Korea says that it is scrapping a 2018 military agreement with Pyongyang after North Korea floated hundreds of trash-filled balloons into South Korea. Pyongyang says the trash was a response to years-long South Korean campaign that sent balloons aimed at undermining the government of Kim Jong-un into North Korea. So they were sending like leaflets and things into North Korea. It's something South Korea stopped doing for a while because the North really didn't like that, but that started up again, over the past few years. And the North Koreans have been sending waste, toilet paper and waste is what they have described it as. That's what Kim Yo-jong described it as. That's the sister of Kim Jong-un. into these balloons and floated them to South Korea. So Seoul reported that hundreds of balloons entering South Korea contained manure. So they're not happy about it, and they are going to trash this agreement. And North Korea, again, they said that this was a response to the leaflet distribution. So just not good that, there's just no sign of tensions easing here. Although I'm not sure when the next presidential election is going to be. It's probably not going to be for a while, but I know the recent parliamentary elections, the opposition won pretty overwhelmingly. So maybe that was a referendum on President Yoon's policies that have just ratcheted up tensions. So maybe there is a chance that things, ease because of that victory, but we're not seeing anything yet. All right, so the last story here, China warns neighbors of U.S. geopolitical self-interest. So China issued another warning about the South China Sea. It seems like almost every day now we see warnings from China about U.S. involvement in South China Sea and Taiwan. So China urged countries around the South China Sea to be wary of Washington's geopolitical self-interest and maintain autonomy to keep the region stable. The warnings from China's foreign ministry on Monday was in response to claims by Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. of illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive actions in the contested waters, in apparent reference to Beijing and its territorial disputes with Manila. Marcos made the comments at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore on Friday. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said the Philippines was solely responsible for the recent escalation in the South China Sea. It also took aim at the United States, saying the country had played an extremely dishonorable role by supporting Manila. So the ministry said, where am I here? The Chinese Foreign Ministry said, quote, "The United States, out of geopolitical self-interest, has played an extremely dishonorable role by supporting and cooperating with the Philippine side's abusive acts and using the South China Sea issues to provoke tensions between China and regional countries. At present, it is crystal clear who the Philippine foreign policy and its maritime operations serve. Regional countries should remain highly vigilant in this regard and firmly holding the leading role of regional peace and stability in their own hands," end quote. And the U.S. has certainly emboldened Marcos Jr. to be more aggressive as he pushes back against China's claims to the South China Sea. And since Marcos came in, tensions have skyrocketed, and the U.S. is opening new military bases in the Philippines, sending these new missile systems there, doing these huge drills. It's just escalation after escalation in this part of the world, and it is very, very concerning. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. One from Mervet Jude, our fight to get the Democratic Party to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. That's the story about a Palestinian American pushing the California Democrat Party to adopt the resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. One from Mark Episkopos, the new theory of Ukrainian victory is the same as the old. One from Ramsey Baroud, the untold ICC story, how Global South helped Palestine challenge Western institutions. One from Juan Gabriel Tocatlian, the elusive Chinese boogeyman in Latin America. And our spotlight is from John Weeks, Long Vietnam Syndrome. So please go check all of that out. You could always support this show by sharing it, telling your friends, subscribe on YouTube and Rumble, wherever you prefer to watch. Follow us on Instagram and on X. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.